Singapore, officially the Republic of Singapore, is an island country and city-state in Southeast Asia. The country's territory comprises one main island, 63 satellite islands and islets, and one outlying islet. It is about 1 degree of latitude 137 kilometers or 85 miles north of the equator, off the southern tip of the Malay Peninsula, bordering the Strait of Malacca to the west, the Singapore Strait to the south, along with the Rio Islands in Indonesia, the South China Sea to the east, and the Straits of Johor along with the state of Johor in Malaysia to the north. In its early history, Singapore was a maritime emporium known as Temasek. Subsequently, it was part of a major constituent part of several successive thalassocratic empires. Its contemporary era began in 1819, when Stamford Raffles established Singapore as an intrepid trading post of the British Empire. In 1867, Singapore came under the direct control of Britain as part of the Straits settlements. During World War II, Singapore was occupied by Japan in 1942 and returned to British control as a crown colony following Japan's surrender in 1945. Singapore gained self-governance in 1959 and in 1963 became part of the new Federation of Malaysia, alongside Malaya, North Borneo, and Sarawak. Ideological differences led to Singapore's expulsion from the Federation 2 years later. Singapore became an independent sovereign country in 1965. After early years of turbulence and despite lacking natural resources and a hinterland, the nation rapidly developed to become one of the 4 Asian tigers. As a highly developed country, it has one of the highest PP-adjusted GDP per capita in the world. It is also identified as a tax haven. Singapore is the only country in Asia with a AAA sovereign credit rating from all major rating agencies. It is a major aviation, financial, and maritime shipping hub and has consistently been ranked as one of the most expensive cities to live in for expatriates and foreign workers. Singapore ranks highly in key social indicators: education, healthcare, quality of life, personal safety, infrastructure, and housing, with a home ownership rate of 88%. Singaporeans enjoy one of the longest life expectancies, fastest internet connection speeds, lowest infant mortality rates, and lowest levels of corruption in the world. It has the 3rd highest population density of any country, although there are numerous green and recreational spaces as a result of urban planning. With a multicultural population and in recognition of the cultural identities of the major ethnic groups within the nation, Singapore has 4 official languages: English, Malay, Mandarin, and Tamil. English is the common language, with exclusive use in numerous public services. Multiracialism is enshrined in the Constitution and continues to shape national policies. Singapore is a parliamentary republic and its legal system is based on common law. While it is constitutionally a multi-party democracy where free elections are regularly held, it functions as a de facto one-party state, with the People's Action Party (PAP) maintaining continuous political dominance since 1959. The PAP's long-standing control has resulted in limited political pluralism and a highly centralized governance structure over national institutions. One of the 5 founding members of ASEAN, Singapore is also the headquarters of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Secretariat, the Pacific Economic Cooperation Council Secretariat, and is the host city of many international conferences and events. Singapore is also a member of the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, the East Asia Summit, the Non-Aligned Movement, and the Commonwealth of Nations. Name and etymology. The English name of Singapore is an anglicization of the native Malay name for the country, Singapura Malay pronunciation, Siapura, which was in turn derived from the Sanskrit word for lion city Sanskrit, romanized, Siapura Brahmi, literally lion city, Siha means lion, Pura means city or fortress. 9. Pulau Ujong was one of the earliest references to Singapore Island, which corresponds to a Chinese account from the 3rd century referred to a place as Pilu Zhang Chinese, a transcription of the Malay name for island at the end of a peninsula. 10 early references to the name Temasek or Temasek are found in the Nagarakretagama, a Javanese eulogy written in 1365, and a Vietnamese source from the same time period. The name possibly means sea town, being derived from the Malay Tasek, meaning sea or lake. 11. The Chinese traveler Wang Dayan visited a place around 1330 named Dan Maxi Chinese, Pinyin, DNMX, Wade Giles, Tan Ma Shi or Tam Ma Siak, depending on pronunciation. This may be a transcription of Temasek. Alternatively, it may be a combination of the Malay Tana meaning land and Chinese Shi meaning tin, which was traded on the island. 11 variations of the name Singapura were used for a number of cities throughout the region prior to the establishment of the Kingdom of Singapura. In Hindu-Buddhist culture, lions were associated with power and protection, which may explain the attraction of such a name. 1314. The name Singapura supplanted Temasek sometime before the 15th century, after the establishment of the Kingdom of Singapura on the island by a fleeing Sumatran Raja prince from Palembang. However, the precise time and reason for the name change is unknown. The semi-historical Malay Annals state that Temasek was christened Singapura by Sang Nile Utama, a 13th-century Sumatran Raja from Palembang. The annals state that Sang Nile Utama encountered a strange beast on the island that he took to be a lion. Seeing this as an omen, he established the town of Singapura where he encountered the beast. 1537, 8890-16, 3031. The second hypothesis, drawn from Portuguese sources, postulates that this mythical story is based on the real-life Parameswara of Palembang. Parameswara declared independence from Majapahit and mounted a lion throne. After then being driven into exile by the Javanese, he usurped control over Temasek. He may have rechristened the area as Singapura, recalling the throne he had been driven from. 17. Under Japanese occupation, Singapore was renamed Sianan to Japanese, Hepburn, Shnan, meaning light of the south. 1819. Singapore is sometimes referred to by the nickname the Garden City, in reference to its parks and tree-lined streets. 20. Another informal name, the Little Red Dot, was adopted after an article in the Asian Wall Street Journal of August 4, 1998 said that Indonesian President B.J. Habibie referred to Singapore as a red dot on a map. 2122, 2324. Ancient Singapore information, early history of Singaporean 1299. According to the Malay Annals, the Kingdom of Singapura was founded on the island by Sang Nile Utama. 25. Although the historicity of the accounts as given in the Malay Annals is the subject of academic debates. 26. It is nevertheless known from various documents that Singapore in the 14th century, then known as Temasek, was a trading port under the influence of both the Majapahit Empire and the Siamese kingdoms. 27. And was a part of the Infosphere. 28, 29, 30, 31, 32. These Indianized kingdoms were characterized by surprising resilience, political integrity, and administrative stability. 33. Historical sources also indicate that around the end of the 14th century, its ruler Parameswara was attacked by either the Majapahit or the Siamese, forcing him to move to Malacca, where he founded the Sultanate of Malacca. 34. Archaeological evidence suggests that the main settlement on Fort Canning Hill was abandoned around this time, although a small trading settlement continued in Singapore for some time afterwards. 17. In 1613, Portuguese raiders burned down the settlement, and the island faded into obscurity for the next 2 centuries. 35. By then, Singapore was nominally part of the Johor Sultanate. 36. The wider maritime region and much trade was under Dutch control for the following period after the 1641 Dutch conquest of Malacca. 37. British colonization. Main articles, founding of modern Singapore and Singapore in the Straits settlements. Letter from William Farquhar to Sultan Muhammad Kanzil Alam, the 21st Sultan of Brunei, dated November 28, 1819. In the first line, Farquhar mentions that Sultan Hussein Shah and Temenggung Abdul Rahman allowed the British East India Company to establish a factory in Singapore on 6 February 1819. 3839. The British governor Stamford Raffles arrived in Singapore on January 28, 1819 and soon recognized the island as a natural choice for the new port. 40. The island was then nominally ruled by Tengku Abdul Rahman, the Sultan of Johor, who was controlled by the Dutch and the Bugis. 41. However, the Sultanate was weakened by factional division. Abdul Rahman, the Temenggung of Johor to Tengku Abdul Rahman, as well as his officials, were loyal to the Sultan's elder brother Tengku Long, who was living in exile in Penyengat Island, Rio Islands. With the Temenggung's help, Raffles managed to smuggle Tengku Long back into Singapore. Raffles offered to recognize Tengku Long as the rightful Sultan of Johor under the title of Sultan Hussein, as well as provide him with a yearly payment of $5,000 and another $3,000 to the Temenggung. In return, Sultan Hussein would grant the British the right to establish a trading post on Singapore. 42. The Treaty of Singapore was signed on 6 February 1819, 4344-18-5 survey map. Singapore's free port trade was at Singapore River for 150 years. Fort Canning Hill Centre was home to its ancient and early colonial rulers. In 1824, a further treaty with the Sultan led to the entire island becoming a part of the British Empire. 45. In 1826, Singapore became part of the Straits Settlements, then under the jurisdiction of British India. Singapore became the regional capital in 1836. 46. Prior to Raffles' arrival, there were only about 1,000 people living on the island, mostly indigenous Malays along with a handful of Chinese. 47. By 1860, the population had swelled to over 80,000, more than half being Chinese. 45. Many of these early immigrants came to work on the pepper and Gambier plantations. 48. In 1867, the Straits Settlements were separated from British India, coming under the direct control of Britain. 49. Later, in the 1890s, when the rubber industry became established in Malaya and Singapore. 50. The island became a global center for rubber sorting and export. 45. Panorama of Singapore at sunrise. 1865, lithograph by Vincent Brooks. Singapore was not greatly affected by the First World War 1914-18, as the conflict did not spread to Southeast Asia. The only significant event during the war was the 1915 Singapore Mutiny by Muslim sepoys from British India, who were garrisoned in Singapore. 51. After hearing rumors that they were to be sent to fight the Ottoman Empire, a Muslim state, the soldiers rebelled, killing their officers and several British civilians before the mutiny was suppressed by non-Muslim troops arriving from Johor and Burma. 52. After World War I, the British built the large Singapore naval base as part of the defensive Singapore strategy. 53. Originally announced in 1921, the construction of the base proceeded at a slow pace until the Japanese invasion of Manchuria in 1931. Costing $60 million and not fully completed in 1938, it was nonetheless the largest dry dock in the world, the third largest floating dock, and had enough fuel tanks to support the entire British Navy for 6 months. 53, 54, 55. The base was defended by heavy 15-inch 3/8-ohm naval guns stationed at Fort Siloso, Fort Canning and Labrador, as well as a Royal Air Force airfield at Tenga Air Base. Winston Churchill touted it as the Gibraltar of the East, and military discussions often referred to the base as simply east of Suez. However, the British home fleet was stationed in Europe, and the British could not afford to build a second fleet to protect their interests in Asia. The plan was for the home fleet to sail quickly to Singapore in the event of an emergency. As a consequence, after World War II broke out in 1939, the fleet was fully occupied with defending Britain, leaving Singapore vulnerable to Japanese invasion. 56-57 Japanese occupation. Main article, Japanese occupation of Singapore. British evacuation in 1945 after the Japanese surrender. Kallang Airport's control tower near the city has been conserved. During the Pacific War, the Japanese invasion of Malaya culminated in the Battle of Singapore, when the British force of 60,000 troops surrendered on February 15, 1942. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill called the defeat the worst disaster and largest capitulation in British history. 58 British and Empire losses during the fighting for Singapore were heavy, with a total of nearly 85,000 personnel captured. 59 About 5,000 were killed or wounded, 60 of which Australians made up the majority. 61 60-63 Japanese casualties during the fighting in Singapore amounted to 1,714 killed and 3,378 wounded. 59 The occupation was to become a major turning point in the histories of several nations, including those of Japan, Britain, and Singapore. Japanese newspapers triumphantly declared the victory as deciding the general situation of the war. 64-65 Between 5,000 and 25,000 ethnic Chinese people were killed in the subsequent Suk Ching massacre. 66 British forces had planned to liberate Singapore in 1945-1946. However, the war ended before these operations could be carried out. 67-68 Post-war period. Main article, Colony of Singapore. Map of Singapore town in 1951. After the Japanese surrender to the Allies on August 15, 1945, Singapore fell into a brief state of violence and disorder. Looting and revenge killing were widespread. British, Australian, and Indian troops led by Lord Louis Mountbatten returned to Singapore to receive the formal surrender of Japanese forces in the region from General Saishiro Itagaki on behalf of General Hisaichi Terachi on 12 September 1945, 6768. Meanwhile, Tomoyuki Yamashita was tried by a US military commission for war crimes, but not for crimes committed by his troops in Malaya or Singapore. He was convicted and hanged in the Philippines on 23 February 1946, 6970. Much of the infrastructure in Singapore had been destroyed during the war, including those needed to supply utilities. A shortage of food led to malnutrition, disease, and rampant crime and violence. A series of strikes in 1947 caused massive stoppages in public transport and other services. However, by late 1947 the economy began to recover, facilitated by a growing international demand for tin and rubber. 71 The failure of Britain to successfully defend its colony against the Japanese changed its image in the eyes of Singaporeans. British military administration ended on April 1, 1946, and Singapore became a separate crown colony. 71. In July 1947, separate executive and legislative councils were established and the election of 6 members of the Legislative Council was scheduled for the following year. 72. During the 1950s, Chinese communists, with strong ties to the trade unions and Chinese schools, waged a guerrilla war against the government, leading to the Malayan emergency. The 1954 National Service riots, Hockley bus riots, and Chinese middle schools riots in Singapore were all linked to these events. 73. David Marshall, pro-independence leader of the Labour Front, won Singapore's first general election in 1955. 74. He led a delegation to London, and Britain rejected his demand for complete self-rule. He resigned and was replaced by Lim Yew Hock in 1956, and after further negotiations Britain agreed to grant Singapore full internal self-government for all matters except defense and foreign affairs on 3 June 1959. 75. Days before, in the May 30, 1959 election, the People's Action Party PAP won a landslide victory. 76. Governor Sir William Ormond Codrington Good served as the first Yang di Pertuan Negara head of state. 77. Within Malaysia Aman article, State of Singapore Malaysia Singapore thrived as an entrept. In the 1960s, bumboats were used to transport cargoes and supplies between nearshore ships and Singapore River. PAP leaders believed that Singapore's future lay with Malaya, due to strong ties between the two. It was thought that reuniting with Malaya would benefit the economy by creating a common market, alleviating ongoing unemployment woes in Singapore. However, a sizable left-wing faction of the PAP was strongly opposed to the merger, fearing a loss of influence, and hence formed the Barisan Sosialis after being kicked out from the PAP. 78-79. The ruling party of Malaya, United Malay's national organization UMNO, was staunchly anti-communist, and it was suspected UMNO would support the non-communist factions of PAP. UMNO, initially skeptical of the idea of a merger due to distrust of the PAP government and concern that the large ethnic Chinese population in Singapore would alter the racial balance in Malaya on which their political power base depended, became supportive of the idea of the merger due to joint fear of a communist takeover. 80. On May 27, 1961, Malaya's Prime Minister, Tunku Abdul Rahman, made a surprise proposal for a new federation called Malaysia, which would unite the current and former British possessions in the region, the Federation of Malaya, Singapore, Brunei, North Borneo, and Sarawak. 80-81. UMNO leaders believed that the additional Malay population in the Bornean territories would balance Singapore's Chinese population. 75. The British government, for its part, believed that the merger would prevent Singapore from becoming a haven for communism. 82. To obtain a mandate for a merger, the PAP held a referendum on the merger. This referendum included a choice of different terms for a merger with Malaysia and had no option for avoiding merger altogether. 83-84. On September 16, 1963, Singapore joined with Malaya, the North Borneo, and Sarawak to form the new Federation of Malaysia under the terms of the Malaysia Agreement. 85. Under this agreement, Singapore had a relatively high level of autonomy compared to the other states of Malaysia. 86. Indonesia opposed the formation of Malaysia due to its own claims over Borneo and launched confrontation in Indonesian in response to the formation of Malaysia. 87. On March 10, 1965, a bomb planted by Indonesian saboteurs on a mezzanine floor of McDonald House exploded, killing 3 people and injuring 33 others. It was the deadliest of at least 42 bomb incidents which occurred during the confrontation. 88 to members of the Indonesian Marine Corps, Osman bin Haji Mohammed Ali and Harun bin Said, were eventually convicted and executed for the crime. 89. The explosion caused $250,000 equivalent to $2,494,456 in 2024 in damages to McDonald House. 1991. Even after the merger, the Singaporean government and the Malaysian central government disagreed on many political and economic issues. 92. Despite an agreement to establish a common market, Singapore continued to face restrictions when trading with the rest of Malaysia. In retaliation, Singapore did not extend to Sabah and Sarawak the full extent of the loans agreed to for economic development of the two eastern states. Talks soon broke down, and abusive speeches and writing became rife on both sides. This led to communal strife in Singapore, culminating in the 1964 race riots. 93. On August 7, 1965, Malaysian Prime Minister Tunku Abdul Rahman, seeing no alternative to avoid further bloodshed and with the help of secret negotiations by PAP leaders, as revealed in 2015-94, advised the Parliament of Malaysia that it should vote to expel Singapore from Malaysia. 92. On August 9, 1965, the Malaysian Parliament voted 126-0 to move a bill to amend the constitution, expelling Singapore from Malaysia, which left Singapore as a newly independent country. 75, 95, 96, 97, 98, 94 Republic of Singapore. See also, Independence of Singapore Agreement 1965. Lee Kuan Yew, the first Prime Minister of Singapore. After being expelled from Malaysia, Singapore became independent as the Republic of Singapore on 9 August 1965, 99-100 with Lee Kuan Yew and Yusof bin Ishak as the first Prime Minister and President respectively. 101-102 In 1967, the country co-founded the Association of Southeast Asian Nations ASEAN. 103. Race riots broke out once more in 1969. 104 Lee Kuan Yew's emphasis on rapid economic growth, support for business entrepreneurship, and limitations on internal democracy shaped Singapore's policies for the next half-century. 105-106 Economic growth continued throughout the 1980s, with the unemployment rate falling to 3% and real GDP growth averaging at about 8% up until 1999. During the 1980s, Singapore began to shift towards high-tech industries, such as the wafer fabrication sector, in order to remain competitive as neighboring countries began manufacturing with cheaper labor. Singapore Changi Airport was opened in 1981 and Singapore Airlines was formed. 107. One of the world's busiest ports and the service and tourism industries also grew immensely during this period. 108-109 The People's Action Party PAP has remained in power since independence. Some activists and opposition politicians see the government's strict regulation of political and media activities as an infringement on political rights. 110. In response, Singapore has seen several significant political changes, such as the introduction of the non-constituency members of parliament in 1984 to allow up to 3 losing candidates from opposition parties to be appointed as MPs. Group representation constituencies (GERCs) were introduced in 1988 to create multi-seat electoral divisions intended to ensure minority representation in parliament. 111. Nominated members of parliament were introduced in 1990 to allow non-elected non-partisan MPs. 112. The Constitution was amended in 1991 to provide for an elected president who has veto power in the use of past reserves and appointments to certain public offices. 113. In 1990, Goh Chok Tong succeeded Lee and became Singapore's second prime minister. 114. During Goh's tenure, the country went through the 1997 Asian financial crisis and the 2003 SARS outbreak. 115-116. In 2004, Lee Hsien Loong, the eldest son of Lee Kuan Yew, became the country's third prime minister. 116 Lee Hsien Loong's tenure included the 2008 financial crisis, the resolution of a dispute over land ownership at Tanjong Pagar railway station between Singapore and Malaysia, the introduction of the 2 integrated resorts located at the Marina Bay Sands and Resorts World Sentosa, and the COVID-19 pandemic. 117 The PAP suffered its worst ever electoral results in 2011, winning just 60% of votes, amidst debate over issues including the influx of foreign workers and the high cost of living. 118 On March 23, 2015, Lee Kuan Yew died, and a 1-week period of public mourning was observed nationwide. 106 Subsequently, The PAP regained its dominance in parliament through the September general election, receiving 69.9% of the popular vote, 119, although this remained lower than the 2001 tally of 75.3120 and the 1968 tally of 86.7111. The 2020 election held in July saw the PAP drop to 61% of the vote, while the Workers' Party took 10 of the 93 seats, the highest number ever won by another party, 1-2. On May 15, 2024, Lawrence Wong became Singapore's fourth Prime Minister. He is the first Prime Minister born after independence, 1-3. His first electoral test in the 2025 election saw the PAP winning 65.5% of the vote and 87 out of 97 seats in Parliament, 1-4. Government and Politics Min articles, Government of Singapore, Politics of Singapore, and Administrative Divisions of Singapore. Istana is the official residence and office of the President, as well as the working office of the Prime Minister. The Supreme Court left and Parliament House right where the Singapore Parliament sits. Speaker's Corner at Hong Lim Park provides a public demonstration area, which are often restricted in other parts of the country. Singapore is a parliamentary republic based on the Westminster system. The Constitution of Singapore is the supreme law of the country, establishing the structure and responsibility of governance. The President is the head of state, 1-5, 1-6. The governance of Singapore is separated into three branches. Executive. The executive consists of the cabinet, led by the Prime Minister, and the Attorney General's chambers, led by the Attorney General, 1-7. The cabinet is collectively responsible for all government policies and the day-to-day administration of the affairs of state. It is typically composed of members of the Singapore Parliament. The Prime Minister is appointed by the President, and the ministers in the Cabinet and the Attorney General are appointed by the President, acting on the advice and consent of the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is the effective head of the executive branch of government, 1-8, 1-5 legislature. The Singapore Parliament is unicameral and, together with the President, comprises the legislature. 1-9 members of Parliament MP consist of elected, non-constituency, and nominated members. The majority of MPs are elected into Parliament at a general election. The Singapore Parliament is collectively responsible for enacting the laws governing the state. 1-5 The President holds limited discretionary powers of oversight over the government. The President's veto powers are further subject to parliamentary overruling. 1-3-0-1-3-1 Judiciary. The judiciary's function is to independently administer justice and is headed by the Chief Justice of the Republic of Singapore. The judges and judicial commissioners are appointed by the President on the advice of the Prime Minister. 1-3-2. The Supreme Court and state courts adjudicates in civil disputes between persons, convicts or acquits accused persons in criminal prosecutions, and interprets laws to decide on its constitutionality. Any law or provision of a law found to be unconstitutional can be struck down by the Supreme Court. 1-3-3. The President is directly elected by popular vote for a renewable 6-year term. Requirements for this position, which were enacted by the PAP government, are extremely stringent, such that only a handful of people qualify for the candidacy. 1-3-4-1-3-5 These qualifications include that a candidate needs to be a person at least 45 years of age who is no longer a member of a political party, to either have held public office for at least 3 years in a number of specific public service leadership roles, or to have 3 years' experience as chief executive of a fully profitable private sector company with at least as $500 million in shareholders' equity, be a resident in Singapore for at least 10 years, not have a criminal record, and more. 1-3-6-1-3-5-1-3-7. Candidates must also satisfy the Presidential Elections Committee PEC that he or she is a person of integrity, good character, and reputation. 138 from 2017, the Constitution requires that presidential elections be reserved for a racial community if no one from that ethnic group has been elected to the presidency in the 5 most recent terms. 139. Only members of that community may qualify as candidates in a reserved presidential election. 140. In the 2017 presidential election, this combination of stringent requirements and a reserved election that required the candidate to be of the 13% Malay ethnic group led to the PEC approving a single candidate for the presidency, 1-1 Halima Yaakob, considered part of the Malay community, won in an uncontested election. She also became Singapore's first female president. Members of Parliament MPs are elected at least every 5 years or sooner with a snap election. The 14th and current parliament has 103 members, 93 were directly elected from the 31 constituencies, 9 are non-partisan nominated members appointed by the president, and 3 are non-constituency members from opposition parties who were not elected in the last general election but appointed to the legislature to increase opposition party representation. In group representation constituencies, GERCs, political parties assemble teams of candidates to contest elections. At least one MP in a GERC must be of an ethnic minority background. All elections are held using first-past-the-post voting. 142 MPs host weekly political surgeries, called Meet the People sessions, where they help constituents resolve personal issues which can be related to housing, financial assistance, and immigration. 143 The People's Action Party occupies a dominant position in Singaporean politics, having won large parliamentary majorities in every election since self-governance was granted in 1959. The PAP, self-described as pragmatic, have a syncretic ideology combining free market principles, civil nationalism, and welfarism. 144, 145, 146. Despite promulgating restrictions on civil liberties, Singapore under the PAP has seen consistent economic growth and political stability. 147. The most represented and popular opposition party is the Centre-Left Workers' Party, which holds 8 seats in Parliament. 1-2 The long-standing hegemony of the People's Action Party has led to Singapore being described by academics as an illiberal democracy. 148, 149, 150, 151 or a soft authoritarian state in which the PAP faces little to no feasible political competition to its rule of the country. 152, 153, 154, 155 The multi-party democratic process of Singapore has been described as minimal in comparison to the state's focus on economic development and social order. 156. According to Gordon P. Means, Professor Emeritus of Political Science at McMaster University, Singapore reinvented the benevolent yet highly authoritarian colonial system of governance inherited from Britain rather than forging a full democracy. A conservative ideology of Asian values evolved to replace British rule, based on communal loyalty, distrust of government, and avoidance of individual or collective responsibility for wider public interests, with less regard for human rights in the nascent Western sense. 157. The fact that neither the public nor elites had experience with democracy helped create Singapore's political culture, as dominated by status-focused hierarchies committed to economic development. 153. The legacy of Asian values and the limited political culture within Singapore has led to the country being described as classic illustration of soft authoritarianism. 156 and profoundly illiberal. 158 The judicial system is based on English common law, continuing the legal tradition established during British rule and with substantial local differences. Criminal law is based on the Indian Penal Code originally intended for British India, and was at the time as a Crown colony also adopted by the British colonial authorities in Singapore and remains the basis of the criminal code in the country with a few exceptions, amendments and repeals since it came into force. 159. Trial by jury was abolished in 1970-160. Singapore is known for its strict laws and conservative stances on crime. Both corporal punishment by caning 161-162 and capital punishment by hanging are retained and commonly used as legal penalties. 163 The right to freedom of speech and association is guaranteed by Article 14(1) of the Constitution of Singapore, although there are provisions in the subsequent subsection that regulate them. 164. The government has restricted freedom of speech and freedom of the press as well as some civil and political rights. 165. In 2023, Singapore was ranked 129th out of 180 nations by Reporters Without Borders on the Global Press Freedom Index. 166 Freedom House ranks Singapore as partly free in its Freedom in the World report. 167-147 and the Economist Intelligence Unit ranks Singapore as a flawed democracy, the second freest rank of 4 in its Democracy Index. 168-169 All public gatherings of 5 or more people require police permits, and protests may legally be held only at the Speaker's Corner. 170 in the Corruption Perceptions Index, which ranks countries by perceived levels of public sector corruption, Singapore has consistently ranked as one of the least corrupt countries in the world, in spite of being illiberal. 171 Singapore's unique combination of a strong, soft authoritarian government with an emphasis on meritocracy is known as the Singapore model, and is regarded as a key factor behind Singapore's political stability, economic growth, and harmonious social order. 172-173-174-175 In 2021, The World Justice Project's Rule of Law Index ranked Singapore as 17th overall among the world's 193 countries for adherence to the rule of law. Singapore ranked high on the factors of order and security 3, absence of corruption 3, regulatory enforcement 4, civil justice 8, and criminal justice 7, and ranked significantly lower on factors of open government 34, constraints on government powers 32, and fundamental rights 38, 176. Foreign Relations Main article, Foreign Relations of Singapore. Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong at the 2017 G20 meeting in Germany. Since 2010, Singapore has often been invited to participate in G20 processes. Singapore's stated foreign policy priority is maintaining security in Southeast Asia and surrounding territories. An underlying principle is political and economic stability in the region. 177. It has diplomatic relations with more than 180 sovereign states. 178. As one of the 5 founding members of ASEAN. 179. Singapore is a strong supporter of the ASEAN Free Trade Area (AFTA) and the ASEAN Investment Area (AIA). It is also the host of the APEC Secretariat. 180. Singapore is also a founding member of the Forum of Small States (FOSS), a voluntary and informal grouping at the UN. 181. Singapore maintains membership in other regional organizations, such as Asia-Europe Meeting, the Forum for East Asia-Latin American Cooperation, the Indian Ocean Rim Association, and the East Asia Summit. 177. It is also a member of the Non-Aligned Movement. 182. The United Nations and the Commonwealth. 183. 184. While Singapore is not a formal member of the G20, it has been invited to participate in G20 processes in most years since 2010. 185. Singapore is also the location of the Pacific Economic Cooperation Council (PEC) Secretariat. 186. In general, bilateral relations with other ASEAN members are strong. However, disagreements have arisen. 187. And relations with neighboring Malaysia and Indonesia have sometimes been strained. 188. Malaysia and Singapore have clashed over the delivery of fresh water to Singapore. 189. And access by the Singapore Armed Forces to Malaysian airspace. 188. Border issues exist with Malaysia and Indonesia, and both have banned the sale of marine sand to Singapore over disputes about Singapore's land reclamation. 190. Some previous disputes, such as the Pedra Branca dispute, have been resolved by the International Court of Justice. 191. Piracy in the Strait of Malacca has been a cause of concern for all 3 countries. 189. Close economic ties exist with Brunei, and the two share a pegged currency value through a currency interchangeability agreement between the 2 countries, which makes both Brunei dollar and Singapore dollar banknotes and coins legal tender in either country. 192. 193. The first diplomatic contact with China was made in the 1970s, with full diplomatic relations established in the 1990s. China has been Singapore's largest trading partner since 2013, after surpassing Malaysia. 194. 195. 196. 197. 198. Singapore and the United States share a long-standing close relationship, in particular in defense, the economy, health, and education. Singapore has also increased cooperation with ASEAN members and China to strengthen regional security and fight terrorism, and participated in ASEAN's first joint maritime exercise with China in 2018. 199. It has also given support to the US-led coalition to fight terrorism, with bilateral cooperation in counter-terrorism and counter-proliferation initiatives, and joint military exercises. 187. As Singapore has diplomatic relations with both the United States and North Korea, and was one of the few countries that have relationships with both countries. 200. In June 2018, it hosted a historic summit between US President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, the first ever meeting between the sitting leaders of the 2 nations. 201. 202. It also hosted the Ma Xi meeting in 2015, the first meeting between the political leaders of the 2 sides of the Taiwan Strait since the end of the Chinese Civil War in 1950. 203. 204. 205. The Singaporean military, arguably the most technologically advanced in Southeast Asia. 206. Consists of the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Digital and Intelligence Service. It is seen as the guarantor of the country's independence. 207. Translating into Singapore culture, involving all citizens in the country's defense. 208. The government spent 2.7% of the country's GDP on the military in 2024, the highest in the region. 209. After its independence, Singapore had only 2 infantry regiments commanded by British officers. Considered too small to provide effective security for the new country, the development of its military forces became a priority. 210. In addition, in October 1971, Britain pulled its military out of Singapore, leaving behind only a small British, Australian and New Zealand force as a token military presence. 211. A great deal of initial support came from Israel. 210. A country unrecognized by Singapore's neighboring Muslim-majority nations of Malaysia and Indonesia. 212-213-214. The Israel Defense Forces IDF commanders were tasked by the Singapore government to create the Singapore Armed Forces SAF from scratch, and Israeli instructors were brought in to train Singaporean soldiers. Military courses were conducted according to the IDF's format, and Singapore adopted a system of conscription and reserve service based on the Israeli model. 210. Singapore still maintains strong security ties with Israel and is one of the biggest buyers of Israeli arms and weapons systems. 215, with one recent example being the Matador anti-tank weapon. 216. The SAF is being developed to respond to a wide range of issues in both conventional and unconventional warfare. The Defense Science and Technology Agency (DSTA) is responsible for procuring resources for the military. 217. The geographic restrictions of Singapore mean that the SAF must plan to fully repulse an attack, as they cannot fall back and regroup. The small size of the population has also affected the way the SAF has been designed, with a small active force and a large number of reserves. 208. Republic of Singapore Air Force Black Knights perform at the Singapore Air Show. Singapore has conscription for all able-bodied males at age 18, except those with a criminal record or who can prove that their loss would bring hardship to their families. Males who have yet to complete pre-university education are awarded the Public Service Commission (CSC) scholarship or are pursuing a local medical degree can opt to defer their draft. 218-219. Though not required to perform military service, the number of women in the SAF has been increasing. Since 1989, they have been allowed to fill military vocations formerly reserved for men. Before induction into a specific branch of the armed forces, recruits undergo at least 9 weeks of basic military training. 220. Because of the scarcity of open land on the main island, training involving activities such as live firing and amphibious warfare are often carried out on smaller islands, typically barred to civilian access. However, large-scale drills, considered too dangerous to be performed in the country, have been performed in other countries such as Brunei, Indonesia, Thailand, and the United States. In general, military exercises are held with foreign forces once or twice per week. 208. Due to airspace and land constraints, the Republic of Singapore Air Force SAF maintains a number of overseas bases in Australia, the United States, and France. The SAF's 130 Squadron is based in RAF Base Pearce, Western Australia, 2-1, and its 126 Squadron is based in the Oki Army Aviation Centre, Queensland, 2-2. The SAF has one squadron, the 150 Squadron, based in Cazaux Air Base in southern France, 2-3. The SAF's overseas detachments in the United States are Luke Air Force Base in Arizona, Marana in Arizona, Mountain Home Air Force Base in Idaho, and Anderson Air Force Base in Guam, 2-4-5 2-6. The SAF has sent forces to assist in operations outside the country, in areas such as Iraq, 2-7, and Afghanistan, 2-8 2-9, in both military and civilian roles. In the region, they have helped to stabilize East Timor 2-3-0 and have provided aid to ACE in Indonesia following the 2004 Indian Ocean earthquake and tsunami. 2-3-1. Since 2009, the Republic of Singapore Navy ASEAN has deployed ships to the Gulf of Aden to aid in countering piracy efforts as part of Task Force 151. 2-3-2. The SAF also helped in relief efforts during Hurricane Katrina 2-3-3 and Typhoon Haiyan 2-3-4. Singapore is part of the Five Power Defence Arrangements (EFTA), a military alliance with Australia, Malaysia, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. 208. According to the 2024 Global Peace Index, Singapore is the 5th most peaceful country in the world. 235. Human Rights Main article, Human Rights in Singapore. See also Abortion in Singapore, Capital Punishment in Singapore, and LGBT rights in Singapore. A capital punishment is a legal and enforced penalty in Singapore. The country is one of 4 in the developed world to retain the death penalty, along with the United States, Japan, and Taiwan. Particularly, its use against drug trafficking has been a source of contention with non-governmental organizations such as Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. 236-37. The government has responded that it has no doubts that it is the right policy and that there is clear evidence of serious deterrence, and that the law should be looked at upon in the wider context of saving lives, particularly citizens. 238. In 2004, Amnesty International claimed that some legal provisions of the Singapore system for the death penalty conflict with the right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty. 239 The government has disputed Amnesty's claims, stating that their position on abolition of the death penalty is by no means uncontested internationally and that the report contains grave errors of facts and misrepresentations. 240 From 1938 to 2023, sexual relations between men were technically illegal under Section 377A of the Penal Code, first introduced during British colonial rule. 241 During the last few decades, this law was mostly unenforced and pressure to repeal it increased as homosexuality became more accepted by Singaporean society. 242 Meanwhile, sexual relations between women had always been legal. 243 In 2022, Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong announced that Singapore would repeal 377A, effectively decriminalizing homosexual behavior. Nevertheless, he added that the repeal will not affect the recognition of traditional familial and societal norms, including how marriage is defined, leaving the legal status of same-sex marriage unchanged for the time, although the possibility of civil unions was not officially ruled out. For Lee described this as a compromise between the conservative and often religious and progressive elements of Singaporean society to prevent further political fracturing. 245 The law was officially repealed on 3 January 2023. 246 Pink.sg, an event held in support of the LGBT community, has drawn thousands of people annually since 2009 with increasing attendance. 247 According to a survey conducted by the Institute of Policy Studies in 2019, Singaporean society has become more liberal on LGBT rights. In the survey, more than 20% of people said that sexual relations between adults of the same sex were not wrong at all or not wrong most of the time, up from 10% in 2013. The survey found that 27% felt the same way about same-sex marriage, an increase from 15% in 2013, and 30% did so about same-sex couples adopting a child, an increase from 24% in 2013. 248-249. In 2021, 6 Singaporeans protested for improved trans protections in the educational system outside the Ministry of Education headquarters at Buona Vista. 250 Pimps often traffic women from neighboring countries such as China, Malaysia, and Vietnam at their brothels, as well as rented apartments and hostels for higher profit margins when they get a cut from customers. 251-52. In response, amendments were made to the Women's Charter by the government in 2019 to legislate more serious punishments for traffickers, including imprisonment of up to 7 years and a fine of S100,000 to 53. Singapore has a highly developed market economy based historically on extended intra trade. Along with Hong Kong, South Korea, and Taiwan, Singapore is one of the 4 Asian tigers and has surpassed its peers in terms of gross domestic product (GDP) per capita. Between 1965 and 1995, growth rates averaged around 6% per annum, transforming the living standards of the population. 254 The Singaporean economy is regarded as free. 255 Innovative. 256 Dynamic. 257 and business-friendly. 258 For several years, Singapore has been one of the few 259 countries with a AAA credit rating from the Big Three, and the only Asian country to achieve this rating. 260 Singapore attracts a large amount of foreign investment as a result of its location, skilled workforce, low tax rates, advanced infrastructure, and zero tolerance against corruption. 261 It was the world's 4th most competitive economy in 2023, according to the International Institute for Management Development's World Competitiveness Ranking of 64 countries. 262 With the highest GDP PPP per capita. 263-64-65 Roughly 44% of the Singaporean workforce is made up of non-Singaporeans. 266 Despite market freedom, Singapore's government operations have a significant stake in the economy, contributing 22% of the GDP. 267 The city is a popular location for conferences and events. 268 Singapore Airlines celebrated the nation's Golden Jubilee with a flag livery on its Airbus A380. Singapore Airlines, the country's flag carrier, celebrated the nation's 2015 Golden Jubilee with a flag livery on its Airbus A380. The currency of Singapore is the Singapore dollar SGD or S, issued by the Monetary Authority of Singapore MAS. 269 It has been interchangeable with the Brunei dollar at par value since 1967-70. MAS manages its monetary policy by allowing the Singapore dollar exchange rate to rise or fall within an undisclosed trading band. This is different from most central banks, which use interest rates to manage policy, 271. Singapore has the world's 11th largest foreign reserves, 272, and one of the highest net international investment position per capita, 273-7 for Singapore has been identified as a tax haven, 275 for the wealthy due to its low tax rates on personal income and tax exemptions on foreign-based income and capital gains. Individuals such as Australian millionaire retailer Brett Blundy and multi-billionaire Facebook co-founder Eduardo Saverin are two examples of wealthy individuals who have settled in Singapore, 276. In 2009, Singapore was removed from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development OECD least GRIs of tax havens, 277, and ranked 4th on the Tax Justice Network's 2015 Financial Secrecy Index of the world's offshore financial service providers, banking 1/8 of the world's offshore capital, while providing numerous tax avoidance and evasion opportunities, 278. In August 2016, the Straits Times reported that Indonesia had decided to create tax havens on 2 islands near Singapore to bring Indonesian capital back into the tax base, 279. In October 2016, the Monetary Authority of Singapore admonished and fined UBS and DBS and withdrew Falcon Private Bank's banking license for their alleged role in the Malaysian sovereign fund scandal, 280281. In 2016, Singapore was rated the world's most expensive city for the 3rd consecutive year by the Economist Intelligence Unit, 28283, and this remained true in 2018-284. The government provides numerous assistance programs to the homeless and needy through the Ministry of Social and Family Development, so acute poverty is rare. Some of the programs include providing financial assistance to needy households, providing free medical care at government hospitals, and paying for children's tuition, 285-286-287. Other benefits include compensation for gym fees to encourage citizens to exercise, 288 up to S166. 000 as a baby bonus for each citizen, 289 heavily subsidized healthcare, financial aid for the disabled, the provision of reduced-cost laptops for poor students, 290 rebates for costs such as public transport, 291 and utility bills, and more, 292-293. In the 2025 report, Singapore was ranked 13th in the world in the Human Development Index HDI with a value of 0.946, making it one of 4 regions in Asia to be ranked within the top 20, with the other 3 being Hong Kong, United Arab Emirates, and South Korea. 8. Singapore consists of 63 islands, including the main island, Pulau Ujong. 294. There are 2 man-made connections to Johor, Malaysia, the Johor-Singapore Causeway in the north and the Tuas Second Link in the west. Jurong Island, Pulau Tekong, Pulau Ubin, and Sentosa are the largest of Singapore's smaller islands. The highest natural point is Bukit Timah Hill at 163.63 meters 537 ft. 295 under British rule. Christmas Island and the Cocos Islands were part of Singapore, and both were transferred to Australia in 1957, 296-97-98. Pedra Branca is the nation's easternmost point. 299 land reclamation projects have increased Singapore's land area from 580 square kilometers 220 sq mi in the 1960s to 710 square kilometers to 70 sq mi by 2015, an increase of some 22%, 130 km 300. The country is projected to reclaim another 56 square kilometers 20 sq mi 301. Some projects involve merging smaller islands through land reclamation to form larger, more functional and habitable islands, as has been done with Jurong Island, 302. The type of sand used in reclamation is found in rivers and beaches, rather than deserts, and is in great demand worldwide. In 2010, Singapore imported almost 15 million tons of sand for its projects, the demand being such that Indonesia, Malaysia, and Vietnam have all restricted or barred the export of sand to Singapore in recent years. As a result, in 2016 Singapore switched to using polders for reclamation, in which an area is enclosed and then pumped dry. 303 Nature Main article, Wildlife of Singapore. Reservoir Botanic Gardens is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, one of 3 gardens in the world, and the only tropical garden to be recognized as such. Singapore's urbanization means that it has lost 95% of its historical forests, 304, and now over half of the naturally occurring fauna and flora in Singapore is present in nature reserves, such as the Bukit Timah Nature Reserve and the Sungai Buloh Wetland Reserve, which comprise only 0.25% of Singapore's land area, 304. In 1967, to combat this decline in natural space, the government introduced the vision of making Singapore a garden city, 305, aiming to improve quality of life, 306. Since then, nearly 10% of Singapore's land has been set aside for parks and nature reserves, 307. The government has created plans to preserve the country's remaining wildlife. 308 Singapore's well-known gardens include the Singapore Botanic Gardens, a 165-year-old tropical garden and Singapore's first UNESCO World Heritage Site. 309 Climatizi. Also, climate change in Singaporeans by the Bay. Singapore has a tropical rainforest climate (KPEN), with no distinctive seasons, uniform temperature and pressure, high humidity, and abundant rainfall. 310-311 temperatures usually range from 23 to 30 to C 73 to 90 F. While temperature does not vary greatly throughout the year, there is a wetter monsoon season from November to February. 312 From July to October, there is often haze caused by bushfires in neighboring Indonesia, usually from the island of Sumatra. 313. Singapore follows the G-Mount 8 time zone, 1 hour ahead of the typical zone for its geographical location. 314. This causes the sun to rise and set particularly late during February, where the sun rises at 7:15 am and sets around 7:20 p.m. During July, the sun sets at around 7:15 p.m. The earliest the sun rises and sets is in late October and early November, when the sun rises at 6:46 am and sets at 6:50 p.m. 315 Singapore recognizes that climate change and rising sea levels in the decades ahead will have major implications for its low-lying coastline. It estimates that the nation will need to spend $100 billion over the course of the next century to address the issue. In its 2020 budget, the government set aside an initial $5 billion towards a coastline and flood protection fund. 316-317. Singapore is the first country in Southeast Asia to levy a carbon tax on its largest carbon-emitting corporations, producing more than 25,000 tons of carbon dioxide per year at $5 per ton. 318. To reduce the country's dependence on fossil fuels, it has ramped up deployment of solar panels on rooftops and vertical surfaces of buildings, and other initiatives like building one of the world's largest floating solar farms at Tengah Reservoir in Tuas. 319 Water Supplyman article. Water supply and sanitation in Singapore. Singapore considers water a national security issue, and the government has sought to emphasize conservation. 323 Water access is universal and of high quality, though the country is projected to face significant water stress by 2040. 3-4-3-5. To circumvent this, the Public Utilities Board has implemented the 4 national taps strategy: water imported from neighboring Malaysia, urban rainwater catchments, reclaimed water neuter, and seawater desalination. 3-6. Singapore's approach does not rely only on physical infrastructure, it also emphasizes proper legislation and enforcement, water pricing, public education, as well as research and development. 3-7. Singapore has declared that it will be water self-sufficient by the time its 1961 long-term water supply agreement with Malaysia expires in 2061. However, according to official forecasts, water demand in Singapore is expected to double from 1.4 to 2.8 billion liters, 1.4 to 2.8 million cubic meters, 370 to 740 million gallons per day between 2010 and 2060. The increase is expected to come primarily from non-domestic water use, which accounted for 55% of water demand in 2010 and is expected to account for 70% of demand in 2060. By that time, water demand is expected to be met by reclaimed water at the tune of 50% and by desalination accounting for 30%, compared to only 20% supplied by internal catchments. 3-8 3-9 Singapore is expanding its recycling system and intends to spend $10 billion, $4 billion in water treatment infrastructure upgrades. 330. The Ulu Pandan wastewater treatment was specially built to test advanced used water treatment processes before full deployment and won the Water or Wastewater Project of the Year award at the 2018 Global Water Awards in Paris, France. 331 operation started in 2017 and was jointly developed by PUB and the Black and Veatch plus Ecom joint venture. 332. Land a C151B MERT train approaching Eunos Station. Public buses in Singapore. Singapore's public transport network is shaped up with trains consisting of the MERT and LART systems, buses and taxis. There are currently 6 MERT lines: North-South MERT Line, East-West MERT Line, Northeast MERT Line, Circle MERT Line, Downtown Mert Line and Thomson East Coast Mert Line, 3 LART lines serving the neighborhoods of Bukit Panjang and Choa Chu Kang. Bukit Panjang LART Line, Sengkang LART Line and Punggol LART Line 334 covering around 241 kilometers 150 mi in total and more than 300 bus routes in operation. 335. Taxis are a popular form of transport as the fares are relatively affordable when compared to many other developed countries, whilst cars in Singapore are the most expensive to own worldwide. 336. Singapore has a road system covering 3,356 kilometers 2,085 mi, which includes 161 kilometers 100 mi of expressways. 337. 338. The Singapore Area Licensing Scheme, implemented in 1975, became the world's first congestion pricing scheme and included other complementary measures such as stringent car ownership quotas and improvements in mass transit. 339. 340. Upgraded in 1998 and renamed Electronic Road Pricing (ERP), the system introduced electronic toll collection, electronic detection, and video surveillance technology. 341. A satellite-based system was due to replace the physical gantries by 2020, but has been delayed until 2026 due to global shortages in the supply of semiconductors. 342. As Singapore is a small island with a high population density, the number of private cars on the road is restricted with a preset car population quota to curb pollution and congestion. Car buyers must pay for additional registration fees or duties of either 100%, 140%, 180%, or 220% of the vehicle's open market value and bid for a Singaporean Certificate of Entitlement (COE) that varies twice a month in supply based on the number of car registrations and deregistrations, which allows the car to be driven on the road for maximum period of 10 years. Car prices are generally significantly higher in Singapore than in other English-speaking countries. 343. As with most Commonwealth countries, vehicles on the road and people walking on the streets keep to the left-hand traffic. 344. The Johor-Singapore Causeway connecting Singapore with Johor Bahru, Malaysia is the busiest international land border crossing in the world, whereby approximately 350,000 travelers cross the border checkpoints of both Woodlands Checkpoint and Sultan Iskandar Building daily with an annual total of 128 million travelers. 345. The Land Transport Authority (LTA) is responsible for all land transport-related infrastructure and operations in Singapore. Air Rain Vortex at Jewel Changi Airport, Singapore is a major international transport hub in Asia, serving some of the busiest sea and air trade routes. Changi Airport is an aviation center for Southeast Asia and a stopover on Qantas Kangaroo route between Sydney and London. 346. There are 2 civilian airports in Singapore, Changi Airport and Seletar Airport. 347. 348. The Changi Airport hosts a network of over 100 airlines connecting Singapore to some 300 cities in about 70 countries and territories worldwide. 349. It has been rated one of the best international airports by international travel magazines, including being rated as the world's best airport for the first time in 2006 by Skytrax. 350. It also had 3 of the 10 busiest international air routes in the world in 2023, the busiest between Kuala Lumpur, Singapore, 7th busiest between Jakarta, Singapore, and 9th busiest between Bangkok, Suvarnabhumi, Singapore. 351. Singapore Airlines, which is the flag carrier of Singapore. 352, has been regarded as a 5-star airline by Skytrax. 353, and been in the world top 10 list of airlines for multiple consecutive years. 354, it held the title of the world's best airline by Skytrax in 2023. It won this title 12 times. Its hub, Changi Airport, had also been rated as the world's best airport from 2013 to 2020 before being superseded by Hamad International Airport in Doha. 355. It reclaimed this title in 2002-356 before being superseded once more in 2024. 357. Seaport of Singapore viewed from the Pinnacle. 2015. The Port of Singapore, managed by port operators PSA International and Jurong Port, was the world's second busiest port in 2019 in terms of shipping tonnage handled, at 2.85 billion gross tons GT, and in terms of containerized traffic, at 37.2 million 20-foot equivalent units. 358. It is also the world's second busiest behind Shanghai, in terms of cargo tonnage with 626 million tons handled. In addition, the port is the world's busiest for transshipment traffic and the world's biggest ship refueling center. 359 Industry sector. Singapore is the world's 3rd largest foreign exchange center, 6th largest financial center, 3602 and largest casino gambling market, 3613 largest oil refining and trading center, largest oil rig producer and hub for ship repair services, 36236334 and largest logistics hub, 365. The economy is diversified, with its top contributors being financial services, manufacturing, and oil refining. Its main exports are refined petroleum, integrated circuits, and computers, 366, which constituted 27% of the country's GDP in 2010. Other significant sectors include electronics, chemicals, mechanical engineering, and biomedical sciences. Singapore was ranked 4th in the Global Innovation Index in 2024 and 7th in 2022, 367, 368, 369, 370, 371. In 2019, there were more than 60 semiconductor companies in Singapore, which together constituted 11% of the global market share. The semiconductor industry alone contributes around 7% of Singapore's GDP. 372 Singapore's largest companies are in the telecommunications, banking, transportation, and manufacturing sectors, many of which started as state-run statutory corporations and have since been publicly listed on the Singapore Exchange. Such companies include Singapore Telecommunications Single, Singapore Technologies Engineering, Keppel Corporation, Overseas Chinese Banking Corporation (OCBC), Development Bank of Singapore (DBS), and United Overseas Bank (UBO). In 2011, after the 2008 financial crisis, OCBC, DBS, and UBO were ranked by Bloomberg Businessweek as the world's 1st, 5th, and 6th strongest banks in the world, respectively, 373. It is home to the headquarters of 3 Fortune Global 500 companies, the highest in the region. 374 The nation's best-known global companies include Singapore Airlines, Changi Airport, and the Port of Singapore, all of which are among the most awarded in their respective fields. Singapore Airlines was ranked as Asia's most admired company and the world's 19th most admired company in 2015 by Fortune's annual 50 Most Admired Companies in the World industry surveys. Other awards it has received include the US-based Travel Plus Leisure's Best International Airline Award, which it has won for 20 consecutive years. 375-376 Changi Airport connects over 100 airlines to more than 300 cities. The Strategic International Air Hub has more than 480 World's Best Airport Awards as of 2015 and is known as the most awarded airport in the world. 377 Over 10 free trade agreements have been signed with other countries and regions. 187 Singapore is the 2nd largest foreign investor in India. 378 It is the 14th largest exporter and the 15th largest importer in the world. 379380 Tourism main article, Tourism in Singapore. Merlion, the official mascot of Singapore. Tourism is a major industry and contributor to the Singaporean economy, attracting 13.6 million international tourists in 2023, more than double Singapore's total population. 381 Tourism contributed directly to about 3% of Singapore's GDP, on average, in the 10 years before 2023, excluding the COVID-19 pandemic years. 382 Altogether, the sector generated approximately 8.6% of Singapore's employment in 2016, 383 in 2015. Lonely Planet and the New York Times listed Singapore as their top and 6th best world destinations to visit, respectively. 384 Well-known landmarks include the Merlion, 385 the Esplanade, 386 Marina Bay Sands, 387 Gardens by the Bay, 388 Jewel Changi Airport, 389 Chichme's, 386 National Gallery Singapore, 386 the Singapore Flyer, 386 the Orchard Road Shopping Belt, 390 the Resort Island of Sentosa, 391 and the Singapore Botanic Gardens, Singapore's first UNESCO World Heritage Site, 392, all located in southern and eastern Singapore. The Victoria Theatre Singapore Tourism Board (STT) is the statutory board under the Ministry of Trade and Industry which is tasked with the promotion of the country's tourism industry. In August 2017, the STT and the Economic Development Board (ED) unveiled a unified brand, Singapore Passion, made possible to market Singapore internationally for tourism and business purposes. 393 The Orchard Road district, which contains multi-story shopping centers and hotels, can be considered the center of shopping and tourism in Singapore. 390 other popular tourist attractions include the Singapore Zoo, River Wonders, Bird Paradise, and Night Safari located in northern Singapore. The Singapore Zoo has embraced the open zoo concept whereby animals are kept in enclosures, separated from visitors by hidden dry or wet moats, instead of caging the animals, and the River Wonders has 300 species of animals, including numerous endangered species. 39 for Singapore promotes itself as a medical tourism hub, with about 200,000 foreigners seeking medical care there each year. Singapore Medical Services aim to serve at least 1 million foreign patients annually and generate $3 billion in revenue. 395 Demographicsman articles, Demographics of Singapore and Singaporeans, also, Race in Singaporeans East Asian, Malay Southeast Asian, and Indian South Asian women in Singapore, C1890. To promote racial harmony among the three races, a unique Racial Harmony Day is celebrated on 21 July every year. As of mid-2023, the estimated population of Singapore was 5,917,600, of whom 3,610,761, 6 were citizens, and the remaining 2,306,938, 4 were either permanent residents 5 to 2, 300 or international students, foreign workers, or dependents 1, 6 for 4, 500, 396. The overall population increased 5% from the prior year, driven largely by foreign workers, 397. This proportion is largely unchanged from the 2010 census, 398-399. The 2020 census reported that about 74.3% of residents were of Chinese descent, 13.5% of Malay descent, 9.0% of Indian descent, and 3.2% of other descent such as Eurasian. This proportion was virtually identical to the 2010 census, with slight increases among Chinese and Malay 0.2 and 0.1% respectively, and minor decreases in Indian and others 0.2 and 0.1. 400,398. Prior to 2010, each person could register as a member of only one race, by default that of his or her father. Therefore, mixed-race persons were solely grouped under their father's race in government censuses. From 2010 onward, people may register using a multiracial classification, in which they may choose one primary race and one secondary race, but no more than 2. 401. Like other developed countries in Asia, Singapore experienced a rapid decline in its total fertility rate TFR beginning in the 1980s for 02. Since 2010, its TFR has largely plateaued at 1.1 children per woman, which is among the lowest in the world and well below the 2.1 needed to replace the population, 403. Consequently, the median age of Singaporean residents is among the highest in the world, at 42.8 in 2022 compared to 39.6 10 years earlier, 404. Starting in 2001, the government introduced a series of programs to increase fertility, including paid maternity leave, childcare subsidies, tax relief and rebates, one-time cash gifts, and grants for companies that implement flexible work arrangements, 402. Nevertheless, live births have continued to decline, hitting a record low in 2022. 405. Singapore's immigration policy is designed to alleviate the decline and maintain its working age population. 406, 407, 408. 91 of resident households households headed by a Singapore citizen or permanent resident own the homes they live in, and the average household size is 3.43 persons, which include dependents who are neither citizens nor permanent residents. 409, 410. However, due to scarcity of land, 78.7% of resident households live in subsidized, high-rise public housing apartments developed by the Housing and Development Board (HID). Also, 75.9% of resident households live in properties that are equal to, or larger than, a 4-room I3 bedrooms plus 1 living room. HID flat or in private housing. 411, 412. Live and foreign domestic workers are quite common in Singapore, with about 224,500 foreign domestic workers there as of December 2013. 413. Education for primary, secondary, and tertiary levels is mostly supported by the state. All institutions, public and private, must be registered with the Ministry of Education (MO). 444. English is the language of instruction in all public schools. 445. And all subjects are taught and examined in English except for the mother tongue language paper. 446. While the term mother tongue in general refers to the first language internationally in Singapore's education system, it is used to refer to the second language, as English is the first language. 447. 448. Students who have been abroad for a while or who struggle with their mother tongue language are allowed to take a simpler syllabus or drop the subject. 449. 450. Education takes place in 3 stages: primary, secondary, and pre-university education, with the primary education being compulsory. Students begin with 6 years of primary school, which is made up of a 4-year foundation course and a 2-year orientation stage. The curriculum is focused on the development of English, the mother tongue, mathematics, and science. 451. 452. Secondary school lasts from 4 to 5 years and is divided between express, normal academic, and normal technical streams in each school, depending on a student's ability level. 453. The basic coursework breakdown is the same as in the primary level, although classes are much more specialized. 454. Pre-university education takes place at either the 21 junior colleges or the Millennia Institute over a period of 2 and 3 years, respectively. 455. As alternatives to pre-university education, however, courses are offered in other post-secondary education institutions, including the 5 polytechnics and 3 IED colleges. Singapore has 6 public universities, 456 of which the National University of Singapore and Nanyang Technological University are among the top 20 universities in the world. 457. National examinations are standardized across all schools, with a test taken after each stage. After the first 6 years of education, students take the primary school leaving examination SLE 451, which determines their placement at secondary school. At the end of the secondary stage, O-level or N-level exams are taken. 458. At the end of the following pre-university stage, the GCE level exams are taken. 459. Some schools have a degree of freedom in their curriculum and are known as autonomous schools for secondary education level and above. 453. Singapore is also an education hub with more than 80,000 international students in 2006. 460,000 Malaysian students cross the Johor-Singapore Causeway daily to attend schools in Singapore. 461. In 2009, 20% of all students in Singaporean universities were international students, the maximum cap allowed, a majority from ASEAN, China, and India. 462. Singapore students have excelled in many of the world education benchmarks in maths, science, and reading. In 2015, both its primary and secondary students rank first in OECD's Global School Performance Rankings across 76 countries, described as the most comprehensive map of education standards. 463. 464. In 2016, Singapore students topped both the Program for International Student Assessment PISA 465, 466, 467, 468 and the Trends in International Mathematics and Science Study TIMSS 469, 470, 471. In the 2016 EF English Proficiency Index taken in 72 countries, Singapore placed 6th and has been the only Asian country in the top 10. 472, 473, 474, 475. Despite its small size, Singapore has a diversity of languages, religions, and cultures. 488. Former Prime Ministers of Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew and Goh Chok Tong, have stated that Singapore does not fit the traditional description of a nation, calling it a society in transition, pointing out the fact that Singaporeans do not all speak the same language, share the same religion, or have the same customs. 488. 489. Singaporeans who speak English as their native language would likely lean toward Western culture along with either Christian culture or secularism. 490. While those who speak Chinese as their native language mostly lean toward Chinese culture, which has linkages with Chinese folk religion, Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. Malay-speaking Singaporeans mostly lean toward Malay culture, which itself is closely linked to Islamic culture. 491. 492. Tamil-speaking Singaporeans mostly lean toward Tamil culture, which itself is mostly linked to Hindu culture. Racial and religious harmony is regarded as a crucial part of Singapore's success and played a part in building a Singaporean identity. 493. 494. When Singapore became independent from the United Kingdom in 1963, most Singaporean citizens were transient migrant laborers who had no intention of staying permanently. 495. There was also a sizable minority of middle-class, locally born people known as Peranakans or Baba Nyonya, descendants of 15th and 16th century Chinese immigrants. With the exception of the Peranakans who pledged their loyalties to Singapore, most of the laborers' loyalties lay with their respective homelands of Malaya, China, and India. After independence, the government began a deliberate process of crafting a uniquely Singaporean identity and culture. 495. Singapore has a reputation as a nanny state. 496-497. The government also places a heavy emphasis on meritocracy, where one is judged based on one's ability. 498. The national flower of Singapore is the hybrid orchid, Vanda Miss Joaquim, named in memory of a Singapore-born Armenian woman who crossbred the flower in her garden at Tanjong Pagar in 1893. 499. Singapore is known as the Lion City, and many national symbols such as the coat of arms and the lion head symbol make use of a lion. Major religious festivals are public holidays. 50. UNESCO recognizes Singapore as a design city. Arts. Further information: Dance in Singapore, Singaporean literature, and music of Singapore. National Gallery Singapore oversees the world's largest public collection of Southeast Asian and Singapore art. National Gallery Singapore oversees the world's largest public collection of Singaporean and Southeast Asian art. During the 1990s, the National Arts Council was created to spearhead the development of performing arts, along with visual and literary art forms. 501. The National Gallery Singapore is the nation's flagship museum with some 8,000 works from Singaporean and other Southeast Asian artists. The Singapore Art Museum focuses on contemporary art from a Southeast Asian perspective. 502. The Red Dot Design Museum celebrates exceptional art and design of objects for everyday life, hosting more than 1,000 items from 50 countries. The Lotus-shaped Archiance Museum hosts touring exhibitions that combine art with the sciences. Other major museums include the Asian Civilizations Museum, the Peranakan Museum, and the Arts House. 503. The Esplanade is Singapore's largest performing arts center. In 2016 alone, it was the site of 5,900 free art and culture events. 504-505. Literature of Singapore, or Singlet, consists of a collection of literary works by Singaporeans written chiefly in the country's 4 official languages: English, Malay, Mandarin, and Tamil. Singapore is increasingly regarded as having 4 sub-literatures instead of 1. Many significant works have been translated and showcased in publications such as the literary journal Singa, published in the 1980s, and 1990 Seconds, with editors including Edwin Thumbu and Ko Buksong, as well as in multilingual anthologies such as Rhythms, a Singaporean millennial anthology of poetry 2000, in which the poems were all translated 3 times each. A number of Singaporean writers such as Tan Swie Hian and Kuo Pao Kun have contributed work in more than 1 language. 506-507. Singapore has a diverse music culture that ranges from pop and rock to folk and classical. Western classical music plays a significant role in the cultural life in Singapore, with the Singapore Symphony Orchestra SSO instituted in 1979. Other notable Western orchestras in Singapore include Singapore National Youth Orchestra 508 and the community-based Brattle Heights Symphony Orchestra 509. Many orchestras and ensembles are also found in secondary schools and junior colleges. Various communities have their own distinct ethnic musical traditions: Chinese, Malays, Indians, and Eurasians. With their traditional forms of music and various modern musical styles, the fusion of different forms account for the musical diversity in the country. 510. The nation's lively urban musical scene has made it a center for international performances and festivals in the region. Some of Singapore's best-known pop singers include Stephanie Sun, J.J. Lin, Liang Wen Fook, Taufik Batisha, and Dick Lee, who is famous for composing National Day theme songs, including Home. 511-512. Singapore's diversity of cuisine is touted as a reason to visit the country due to its combination of convenience, variety, quality, and price. 513. Local food items generally relate to a particular ethnicity: Chinese, Malay, and Indian, but the diversity of cuisine has increased further by the hybridization of different styles. For example, the Peranakan cuisine, a mix of Chinese and Malay cuisine. In hawker centers, cultural diffusion is exemplified by traditionally Malay hawker stalls also selling Tamil food. Hainanese chicken rice, based on the Hainanese dish Wenchang chicken, is considered Singapore's national dish. 514-515. The city-state has a burgeoning food scene ranging from hawker centers open air, food courts air-conditioned, coffee shops open air with up to a dozen hawker stalls, cafes, fast food, simple kitchens, casual, celebrity, and high-end restaurants. 516 cloud kitchens and food delivery are also on the rise, with 70% of residents ordering from delivery apps at least once a month. 517-518 Many international celebrity chef restaurants are located within the integrated resorts. 519 Religious dietary strictures exist. Muslims do not eat pork and Hindus do not eat beef, and there is also a significant group of vegetarians. The Singapore Food Festival, which celebrates Singapore's cuisine, is held annually in July. 520 Prior to the 1980s, street food was sold mainly by immigrants from China, India, and Malaysia to other immigrants seeking a familiar taste. In Singapore, street food has long been associated with hawker centers with communal seating areas. Typically, these centers have a few dozen to hundreds of food stalls, with each specializing in one or more related dishes. 521-516 While street food can be found in many countries, the variety and reach of centralized hawker centers that serve heritage street food in Singapore is unique. 522 In 2018, there were 114 hawker centers spread across the city center and heartland housing estates. They are maintained by the National Environment Agency, which also grades each food stall for hygiene. The largest hawker center is located on the second floor of Chinatown Complex and contains over 200 stalls. 522 The complex is also home to the cheapest Michelin-starred meal in the world, a plate of soya sauce chicken rice or noodles for S2S1. 50 Two street food stalls in the city are the first in the world to be awarded a Michelin star, obtaining a single star each. 523 Sport and Recreation Main article. Sport in Singapore. Joseph Schooling is a gold medalist and Olympic record holder at the Rio 2016 Games 100 meters butterfly. 524 The development of private sports and recreation clubs began in the 19th century colonial Singapore, with clubs founded during this time including the Cricket Club, the Singapore Recreation Club, the Singapore Swimming Club, and the Halansi Club. 525 Weightlifter Tan Hao Liang was Singapore's first Olympic medalist, winning a silver at the 1960 Rome Games. 526 Singapore hosted the inaugural 2010 Summer Youth Olympics, in which 3,600 athletes from 204 nations competed in 26 sports. 527 Indoor and water sports are some of the most popular sports in Singapore. At the 2016 Rio Olympics, Joseph Schooling won Singapore's first Olympic gold medal, claiming the 100-meter butterfly in a new Olympic record time of 50.39 seconds. 524 Singapore sailors have had success on the international stage, with their Optimist team being considered among the best in the world. 528-529 Despite its size, the country has dominated swim meets in the Southeast Asia Games. Its men's water polo team won the SEA Games gold medal for the 27th time in 2017, continuing Singapore sport's longest winning streak. 530 At the 2024 Paris Olympics, Max Metter won Singapore's first Olympic medal in sailing, achieving bronze at the men's Formula Kite on National Day. At 17, he was also Singapore's youngest Olympic medalist. 531 Singapore's women's table tennis team were silver medalists at the 2008 Beijing Olympics. 5-3-5-3-3 They became world champions in 2010 when they beat China at the World Team Table Tennis Championships in Russia, breaking China's 19-year winning streak. 5-3-4 In 2021, Singapore's Loh Keen Yew achieved a world champion status when he won a badminton gold at the 2021 BWF World Championships men's singles, which is one of the most prestigious badminton tournaments alongside the Summer Olympics badminton tournaments. 535 Singapore's Football League, the Singapore Premier League, was launched in 1996 as the S-League and comprises 8 clubs, including one foreign team. 536-537 The Singapore Slingers is one of the inaugural teams in the ASEAN Basketball League, which was founded in October 2009. 538 Kranji Racecourse is run by the Singapore Turf Club and hosts several meetings per week, including international races, notably the Singapore Airlines International Cup. 539 Singapore began hosting a round of the Formula One World Championship, the Singapore Grand Prix at the Marina Bay Street Circuit in 2008. It was the inaugural F1 night race, 540, and the first F1 street race in Asia, 541. It is considered a signature event on the F1 calendar. 5421 Championship was founded in Singapore, a major mixed martial arts MMA promotion in Asia. 543 Media main article, Media of Singaporese also telecommunications in Singapore. Ministry of Communications and Information oversees the development of Infocom, media and the arts. Companies linked to the government control much of the domestic media in Singapore. 544 MediaCorp operates most free-to-air television channels and free-to-air radio stations in Singapore. There are a total of 6 free-to-air TV channels offered by MediaCorp. 545 StarHub TV and Single TV also offer IPTV with channels from all around the world. 546-547 Media Trust, a body with close links to the government, controls most of the newspaper industry in Singapore. 548 Singapore's media industry has sometimes been criticized for being overly regulated and lacking in freedom by human rights groups such as Freedom House. 544 Self-censorship among journalists is said to be common. 548 In 2023, Singapore was ranked 129 on the Press Freedom Index published by Reporters Without Borders, up from 139 the previous year. 549 The Media Development Authority regulates Singaporean media, claiming to balance the demand for choice and protection against offensive and harmful material. 550 Private ownership of TV satellite dishes is banned. 548 Internet in Singapore is provided by state-owned Singtel, partially state-owned StarHub and M1 Limited, as well as some other business internet service providers (ISPs) that offer residential service plans of speeds up to 2 Gbit or s as of spring 2015. 551 Equinix 332 participants and the Singapore Internet Exchange. 70 participants are internet exchange points where internet service providers and content delivery networks exchange internet traffic between their networks' autonomous systems in various locations in Singapore. 55 to 553 In the mid-1980s to 1990s, Singaporeans could also use the locally based videotext service Singapore Teleview to communicate with one another. 554 The phrase intelligent island arose in the 1990s in reference to the island nation's early adaptive relationship with the internet. 554 In 2016, there were an estimated 4.7 million internet users in Singapore, representing 82.5% of the population. 556 The Singapore government does not engage in widespread censoring of the internet. 557 But it maintains a list of 100 websites, mostly pornographic, that it blocks from home internet access as a symbolic statement of the Singaporean community's stand on harmful and undesirable content on the internet. 558 Singapore has the world's highest smartphone penetration rates in surveys by Deloitte 560561 and the Google Consumer Barometer at 89% and 85% of the population respectively in 2014. 562 The overall mobile phone penetration rate is at 148 mobile phone subscribers per 100 people.